today's outstanding guest, Sweet Daddy Siki. Thank you so much for checking out your Sportsline Podcast here on CHCH. I'm Bubba O'Neil. As we do, we shine the spotlight on teams, athletes, officials, and executives who've made or continue to make their mark in Southern Ontario. And folks, this broadcaster is a beauty. In the sports media biz, sometimes life takes a turn and you have to pivot. Well, this native of Verdun, France has done just that and done it at a very high level. From the time I met him in 2001, Jim Lang had an energy about him that was extremely contagious. His expertise in the business has led him to leading a radio crew at Sportsnet, anchoring at the desk, and being a co-host on the Fan 590's morning show. Currently, he's the morning man at 105 The Region in Toronto, and he's also the author of My Day with the Cup. My man, now this has been way too long. Certainly been looking forward to this moment. Jim Lang, thank you for joining us here on the Sportsline Podcast. It's been far too long, partner.
Bubba, it's an absolute pleasure. You're the legend of all legends, the king of Burlington. I'm honored that I'm on.
Well, this is great. You know, I think that a lot of people might not remember this, but I'm going to stir your memory back just to get you a little bit more familiar with our audiences. Now, the fact that, you know, long before I think I even met you at Sportsnet, you were one of the anchors, or at least the voices of the CHCH Game of the Week, with doing a lot of McMaster games. Am I not correct there?
That is absolutely correct. So there was the producers at the time, they needed some extra voices because Mike Hogan was doing some double duty and was not available for all the games. So I would backfill when he would have Argo responsibilities and CFL responsibilities. That was my first real foray into sports television, was doing the Game of the Week on CHTV, and it was invaluable experience. It's one of my favorite experiences, calling OUA football games at a little OUA hockey, and it's sports the way it was meant to be. That's what I will always cherish CH for what they did, and it was such a great experience. I look back at that time fondly, and it's funny to see, you know, like Jesse Lumsden, who was such a star at MAC when I was calling games, and then CFL, and then he became an Olympic bobsled star. So it's great to see how a lot of the athletes and coaches, and Greg Marshall and that, are either have done something else in their lives or were still involved in sports and football.
It is such a true story there, Jim, and the fact that all of us kind of move on and do different things. And from those days, you get familiar with the Southern Ontario area, and you got onto Sportsnet TV, like doing the anchoring. You did a segment. You did a lot of NFL stuff as well, too. But can you give our listeners and viewers as well, too, a perspective? I watch Sportsnet now, and it's all polished and fancy and perfect, and everything just kind of goes right. In the days that we were at Sportsnet, it was very comical, was it not?
Well, stuff went wrong all the time, and you're showing Mike Toth and Jamie Campbell. Mike Toth is a genius play-by-play sports announcer, though a lot of people don't realize how good he was. And what would happen sometimes, we have a teleprompter, and that's where you have your script and the teleprompter. Well, the teleprompter would go out at least once a night, so you would be in your on-cam reading something, but you had to remember it by rote. You had to be able to ad-lib while they're counting it down, because we're going to a Jays game or we're going to live coverage of this or that. And so it was basically, we were like a bunch of high school kids with the substitute teachers, my best way I described it, that were the other TV networks and CBC and TSN had very strict, it's almost like private school and Harry Potter and all that. We were just like, hey, the substitute teacher's down the hallway. Let's go wild. Let's do stuff. And so we were able to do a lot of different things. And that's probably the reason why I write books at this point in my life, Bubba, is they basically came up to me, the Sportsnet website, and said, hey, we need someone to write about the CFL. No one has any CFL background. Like, you've done OUA football, did the voice of the Argos, and like, we have to have Canadian content on our website. It can't all be wire service. So I thought, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, can you write like weekly power rankings? And I thought, I think I can do that. And that was in 2003, basically this time, 2003, when they approached me, Bubba. And that's the start of writing. And then I wrote a little more. Then I would write an article. Then I'd write a blog. And then And then when I was on the Leafs beat, I would do more hockey stuff and getting to know everyone involved in the NHL, coaches and players and staff. And so over time, I just started writing like longer form pieces. They had a Sportsnet magazine. I wrote an ebook. And then I got tabbed to write Ty Domi's book to work with him. And that was just the start of it. And it's just kept going since then.
It really is amazing how things go from one stage of your career to the next. And, and when I do look back at that Sportsnet days, I mean, yeah, you're right. We were always number 2 to sports, for reasons why. But we were never afraid to try different things with different people. And when I look back at those days now, the people that we worked with, I mean, so many of them, like yourself, have gone on to do greater and bigger and better or different things. And it was a real family back then, was it not?
It really was, Bubba. And I'll tell you something. What you learn when you're broadcasting in that kind of level is you've got a blueprint or a framework, but you don't have everything written down, if that makes sense. So we would be left to our own talents and our own devices to fill in the blanks. And, you think about Hazel May when she started, and she is become an absolute monster of broadcasting. And then I'm very proud of the people we work with and where they evolve. Paul Sadu, a dear friend of both of us, just won a Canadian Screen Award for his excellence in sports producing. And, he's like, we all started like small. Substitute teacher was out of the hallway. Let's try to do this. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But with all that experience, we got better bit by bit. And I think that's like in any job. Sometimes you can't control creativity, and you shouldn't tell everyone what to do every step along the way. And sometimes you're like, all right, let's delegate. Let them see what they can do. Let them do that. And then, oh, hey, that worked. I didn't know. Okay, keep doing more of that. And that's kind of how I view my experience at Sportsnet, is because I wasn't pigeonholed and told I can only do this and this and don't do anything else, I ended up picking other skills that I use to this day.
Well, and one of those skills that you still work with to this day is radio. And you had a background in radio. You helped put together the Mojo Radio Sportsnet crew, which I was, so fortunate to be a part of. And I want to get to that a little bit later in the podcast here. But you got to work, with the likes of a Greg Brady, doing the Fan 590 morning show, which was a biggie for you, and that had to have been a wonderful experience too.
It was, Bubba. When I started in radio, I graduated Humber College in the late 80s. There was no sports radio. There was barely any sports television. Like TSN had just launched, and most of the anchors were all established former CTV and CBC people. So there was no avenue for someone coming out of their journalism or radio broadcasting program to get into sports media. And it wasn't until after I worked at a couple of radio stations, I had an opportunity to work at the Fan. This would have been 1995, and that was the start of it. But up until then, I just, there was no opportunity. So that's why throughout my radio career, I would do like music or interviews or public affairs, but then also do sports. And it's funny how all that comes full circle, because in radio in the late 80s and early 90s, the technology wasn't what is now. You had to do a lot of stuff. You had to learn how to do a lot of stuff without the aid of technology. So then later when I was in television and stuff did go wrong, I had the skill from back in the day, from the 80s and 90s, to be able to think on my feet and make up stuff on the fly to keep things going, especially but maybe the viewers and the people listening and watching this don't realize is we would get counted down. And we would have two people in our earpiece at the same time. Someone saying, hey, you've got to be done in 10 seconds. And then the other person's telling you at the same time, counting you down. So even if you didn't have the information in front of you, you had to be able to say it in a cohesive way so the viewer understood, and then be done at 10 seconds. So you could go to the next thing. And I thank all of that to my radio background. And because I had that skill, because we had to do a lot of stuff on all the different radio stations I worked at before I got to Sportsnet, without a lot of extra aids and extra support, that I could do it. And that's the the great thing about, I find, our business is eventually a lot of the different skills you learn along the way, you're going to use at some point in your career.
Yeah, it really is a fine art. And you're right. Radio does help when you're certainly into a television situation. The ability to tap dance, the ability to ad lib. It's a special skill. And as you know and I know, not everyone can do it. And, you talk about the radio skills. Now here you are. Like all good things come to an end at the Fan 590. And you kind of go into a regional radio situation. But I think the fun part for you must have been you were part of a startup, which must have been really exciting up in Markham.
It really was, Bubba. It was a good time in my family's life. My kids were teenagers at the time, and I think they needed me home more. And so I could do the morning show and then be home by midday. And then so if I like to cook, it relaxes me. So I would get home, make sure the kids are home, make sure they had dinner. And then, my wife is Monty. Say hi to Bubba. And then, she would get home for work. There's a hot meal on the table, and then get one of them to swimming, get one of them gymnastics. It gave me more family time. And that was actually perfect. It's actually funny how the things worked out. It couldn't have been better timing for our family's life that change happened, Bubba. And then when I started to get into more book writing, well, what happened? I would get home midday. The kids are at school, and I could write. Get a couple hours to write, and then go get them and take them to their next activity. And kids in in late elementary school through high school have all these after school activities, as you know. So I would be like, okay, well, I'm taking there. Then they don't need me for an hour. Go back and do some more work. And then as they get older, they're on their laptops. They're in the room. They don't want Dad hanging out. Like, Dad, if I need you, I'll call you. Go. I'm listening to Taylor Swift right now, and I'm FaceTiming with my friend Susie. So why don't you go back to the office and write some more hockey books? And that's how it is. And actually, it's been a great experience because I realized, through the last few years, Bubba, how important like what you do at CH and what we do, and the need for local radio and local television, I believe in Canada is more important now than ever before. The people want to know what's going on in Burlington and Hamilton and Stony Creek. People want to know what's going on in Aurora and Vaughan and Markham, because the big networks, big stations, they won't let you know that. Well, then if I don't know, then how do I know there's a charity event or a local sporting event or a local political meeting that maybe I should know about?
Isn't it crazy how the trends have changed? Like, you and I are of a generation when we were growing up that our parents ran to the TV to watch, and we would join them to watch national news. That's not the case anymore. And you're so correct in saying that people, you can get all that information on your device, but people want to know, or at least be told what's going on in their backyard, whether it's sports, whether it's the weather, was there crime, was there something going on at City Hall. And it really, really has changed. And I feel like we are making an impact with doing exactly what that is. And that's servicing your community.
One of my people I always looked up to throughout my sports career was, to me, one of the best I ever did. It's Steve Milton at the Hamilton Spectator. And, Steve Milton is, to me, a Hall of Fame writer and reporter. You could cover hockey, football, Olympic sport, figure skating, and that kind of the craft of putting together a good story and telling it from a Hamilton, Burlington perspective, focusing on the athletes and focusing on the community and what's happening. I don't want that to go away. I just know, like, when I walk the dog, who's yapping right now, my apologies. You don't see that many people with the paper delivered anymore. I can remember growing up, my dad, when he was a higher rank in the military, but when we were in Camp Borden, he would get the afternoon edition of the Toronto Star. And back then, people don't realize it, but you could get the morning edition of the Spectator and the afternoon edition. And for people like my dad who left early, he didn't bother with the morning paper. He got the afternoon edition, and he would not eat dinner till he was done the paper. And I was like, okay, I'm ready for dinner. That was I need to know. And then, as you say, at 10 o'clock, he was watching at the time Knowlton Nash, then Peter Mansbridge, the CBC National News. And that was just how it was done. I know for me, my first foray into sports, when I really got into it, we had moved from Nova Scotia to Camp Borden, and they just started Sportsline with Jim Taddy and Mark Hepsher. And I was so blown away, Bubba. I had never seen anything like it. Highlights, They're talking about Canadian university sports. They're having fun. Like, I've never seen anything like it. I was blown away. I was so into it. And I know so many people in sports media. I mean, I hope it's talked about more, but everyone owes Jim Taddy, Mark Hebscher, and Sportsline, and everybody else involved a huge debt of gratitude. Like, they inspired us. In some ways, they mentored us, but they laid the foundation, as far as I'm concerned.
It's absolutely the truth. People forget that little half an hour show on Global for a good portion of years was blowing away TSN in its early days. It had all the resources and all the money to become a national sports network. Yet that little engine out of global TV in Toronto was really, really something special. They were I think something I would say that really set the standard for so many of us, as you certainly speak about different people in our industry that have gone on to do wonderful things. So, Jim, here's the crazy thing. Now, you start to write, and you talked about what made you write and how you became more proficient at doing it. Well, 8 books later, I think, but you found a common theme, and that's hockey in this country. It seems to resonate with people, does it not?
Oh, it does. It does. It moves the needle in Canadian publishing. It's a business. And so they're always thinking, well, they're trying to sell as many books as possible because they have to make money too. And people want to hear stories. And I have to admit, Bubba, while writing these books, I've learned a lot about myself, both personally and professionally. And, I remember years ago, I was covering the 2006 Stanley Cup final, and Rod Brindamore, then with the Carolina Hurricanes as a player. We were between game 1 and game 2 and asking questions. He was kind of firm but polite. He said, "You don't know what you don't know." And what I have found in writing these books is there are so many stories and so much information about players that we never know about. But when you write these books, they'll let their guard down and they'll tell you the stories. They'll say, this is what really happened. And I am so grateful for that, Bubba. And I cherish it. And I take it very seriously when you're asked to help put their story together. And you really get to know not just as a hockey player, but we forget they're human beings. They're people. They've got a mom and dad, and they've got parents, and they've got a family and brothers and sisters and friends, and they have good days and bad days. And their mental health sometimes is a problem, and their physical health, and they're not robots, and they just have an amazing skill at hockey. But when you talk to them as human beings and about, problems with maybe, worried about their mom being sick or, worried about a child and stuff, that's real stuff. And that's where you get to know the real person that we don't really see when we watch it on TV.
I think of, exactly what your current book, My Day with the Cup. And it's actually, okay, we talk about Burlington connections, Phil Pritchard, the keeper of the cup, and you have found an ability to talk about what is so special about the cup. I mean, one of the hardest trophies in sports to win, but when you win it, you get to celebrate, and that's where your book takes off.
Right, Bubba. So what happened was up until the early 90s, it was very informal. So sometimes someone may or may not have a little bit of time with the cup. But in 1994, the New York Rangers famously won the cup, and they were in Manhattan, and Mark Messier and the crew had a little too much fun in some of the nightclubs in Manhattan, and it got dinged up a bit. So Gary Bettman, to his credit, said, why don't we do something proper? Why don't we do a tour? Why don't we have time with the Stanley Cup and have it supervised with a curator from the Hockey Hall of Fame so it doesn't get damaged and everybody gets to enjoy it. So in 1995, when the New Jersey Devils won and beat Detroit, Phil Pritchard and his crew put a crew together, and they had the Stanley Cup in a road case, and they traveled around. They went to Massachusetts and New Jersey and Burlington, Ontario, and Northern Ontario and Western Canada and Europe, and they travel around. And over the years, Bubba, it's become such a big thing. And it's so unique to any sport that, like Bubba O'Neil's name would be on the cup for your family and friends to see, and you get to spend a day with it and drink out of it and eat out of it and basically enjoy it. And there's no other sport that does that. And that, to me, that's one of the reasons I was so excited to talk about it. And the players were so into it and couldn't have been more grateful. I'll give you an example. It took me 14 months to get Sidney Crosby part of the book, not because Sidney wouldn't talk about it, but because Sidney Crosby is the greatest star of our generation, and he's pulled in all directions, and he's got agents and publicity people protecting him. And when he finally got wind of the book and said, I'd like to talk to Jim about it, I said, look, Sidney, I just need 10 minutes. He talked to me over a half hour, Bubba. He couldn't talk enough about his 3 times with the Stanley Cup and being in Nova Scotia and seeing his grandmother drink beer out of it and playing road hockey with the cup beside his childhood friends in Cole Harbour. And it means so much to them. And a lot of the players say that when it's the dead of summer and they're physically and mentally tired and they don't want to go to the gym and they don't want to skate, they start thinking, but if I win the Stanley Cup, I get to spend a day with it. And that really drives them. And it's not the money, and it's not the fame, and it's not posters and billboards. It's, I'd like to spend a day with the Stanley Cup. And Sidney was very honest. Like, that drives him to this day at his age with everything he's accomplished. He was like, Jim, I want to win another Stanley Cup and spend another day with it. And that's why he puts so much into the off season to get ready for the next season on the hopes that they'll have a deep playoff run and win the cup again.
You know, I don't want to give away the book because there's so many wonderful stories, but we got a guy by the name of Brendan Shanahan and the Shana Plan, oh, yeah. And I know you're a Maple Leaf fan, true and true. He hasn't brought one to Toronto, but he's actually lifted that trophy with the Detroit Red Wings, and I know there's a real neat story there.
Yeah, the first time he had it, he was in the Etobicoke, in the Mimico area of Etobicoke, the south end of Etobicoke. Come on, you say hi to Bubba. He's such a nice man. He's one of Daddy's friends. There you go. You say hi to everyone on CHTV. Oh, hi. So Brendan Shanahan, he had the morning with the cup. They arrived, and he had a little bit of downtime. So he goes, I'm going to go to Apache Burger, which is a famous burger, onion rings, and fries.
Oh, the onion rings.
Yeah, in the west end of Toronto. And so it's not far from his house. So he thought, I'm going to go get an onion. They call it the double, half onion rings, half fries, and a cheeseburger. And then that night is going to be a big party at the nightclub and all that. Well, he's driving there, and doesn't he drive by the gravesite where his father's buried? His dad died when he was younger. And he stopped the car and pulled over by the gravesite and kind of looked over. And he had the cup with him because he was going to bring the cup to Apache Burger. And he thought about it, and there was no one else there. So he took the Stanley Cup to his father's gravesite and had a quiet moment with him. And, he had to stop when he was talking about it because it meant so much. And that's one thing that the keepers talk about, Mike Bolt and Phil Pritchard, that it goes to gravesites. It'll go to the hospital room of a dying friend or relative. And as a rule, the keepers are around the cup all the time, Bubba, except when they know they're going to a hospital room or they're going to a gravesite, they'll stand back and let the player have that moment. They're not a hockey player then. They're a loved one. They're a friend. This is personal time. And I know he did the same thing when he won in '99, taking the cup to the gravesite where he was buried in Quebec. So there's something special about the Stanley Cup that way. And I really like what Brendan Shanahan did that day.
And I will always be probably more of a football guy, no matter what, but I love sports just like yourself. But there is something that's just so incredibly beautiful about the Stanley Cup, and it's such incredible stories that you've captured in your book. And, where can we find it there, Jimmy?
Well, you can go to Amazon and buy it there. You can go to Indigo. You can go to Walmart. You can go to Costco. Anywhere you get a book, you can get it. And I know on Indigo right now, they have a Father's Day sale, so you can get a discount up until Father's Day. So you can get it on the Indigo website by buying it now. But it was really, really eye-opening and enlightening to write the book, Bubba, because so many of the players, they said the only time they ever saw their dad or their grandfather cry is when that Stanley Cup was unpacked from the road case and was put on their kitchen table or in their living room. And for a lot of the players, that's when it really hit them, what being a Stanley Cup champion is all about and what that cup means. And for a lot of them, the night they win the cup, it doesn't sink in, if you know what I mean, Bubba. But when the cup arrives at their house at 7:30 in the morning and it's there all day, and every relative and every friend they've ever had is getting emotional and drinking out of the cup, and it leaves that day and they're like, I'm a Stanley Cup champion.
Well, the word champion, when I think of you, Jim Lang, resonates really strong. You're a champion for me. And let me tell you something here, and this is something it's taken me, almost almost a couple decades to tell you this. And I don't talk about this too much, but it's right there. It's always there with me and always here with me. In that fact that you were one of the people that were responsible for getting me on Sportsnet Radio, a big opportunity, just working in the newsroom, and then getting me to do radio, which was something I'd never really done. And folks, I sucked. I was horrible. I struggled. I did not do a good job. And for the first time in my life in media, I didn't get the job done. And I should have been fired. But I know you and Scott Moore probably had a little conversation and said, we're going to guide him. We're going to help him out. And you gave me from a weekday shift, you put me on the weekends, and I grinded it out, and I got better at doing what I did. And it was a huge, huge lesson for me in media and about growing up in this business. But it would have never happened if you didn't give me the opportunity. So I'm going to say thank you, Jim, for that, because I wouldn't be where I am right now without that someone taking a chance on me and just, hey, TV, radio, you're disposable. You know that. I know that. Yeah. But you gave me a chance, and I'll always, always, always be grateful for you for that.
Well, Bubba, that's very kind of you to say. I always knew you had the talent and the skill, and I was just trying to do what people did for me on the way up is pay it forward. And sometimes that step from I think I can do it to I know I can do it, you need a little nudge out of the nest. And that's what I was trying to do to you. And I know if anyone watching remembers brother Jake Edwards, and I was doing some work at Q in '92, and he kind of did the same thing for me to help me get from here to here. And he was a big part of it. And I always thought someday I'd like to do the same to someone else. And I was glad to do it with you, Bubba, because I never doubted your talent and your passion and your skill. And look what you're doing at CH. So it's not a surprise. I always knew you had it. And then, and I study a lot about coaches in different sports. And I think I understand why they coach. I understand why they're addicted to it, because they like the idea of helping others and seeing someone maximize their potential.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us here on the Sportsline Podcast, my man. Buy the book, everyone. It's a good one. Jimmy's
I got 2 kids in university. Food's expensive.
Sweet Daddy Siki, thanks for joining us, partner.
Sweet Daddy Siki, I love Bubba.
That's your Sportsline Podcast for the day. And as you've just seen and heard, we love talking sports with people just like Jim Lang. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote the Sportsline Podcast, want to hear from you. Please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. And if you do have something to say, I want to hear it. Please comment. For the wonderful people that make the Sportsline Podcast possible. Thank you so very much. And we'll see you tomorrow.